Hello, everyone. Today, we're starting our deep dive into global risks, and our focus is entirely on money. Money rarely moves by accident. It almost always reacts to shifting tides long before politicians make official statements or news stories turn into breaking headlines. If you watch where the capital flows, you can clearly see the outlines of the future. We are currently entering an era where both the political and economic maps of the world are undergoing a massive rewrite. Some regions are facing mounting instability. Others are scrambling to adapt and find a new equilibrium, while a select few are emerging as havens of relative safety. I'm not here to give you day trading tips or try to guess short-term market fluctuations. That's not what I do. As an analyst, my goal is to help you see the bigger picture, how a new map of global economic risk is taking shape, and how it directly drives the decisions of governments, major corporations, and everyday people. We will map out where these risks are stacking up, look at where the battle for economic resilience is being fought, and break down why capital is increasingly choosing very specific destinations. If you're wondering why this matters to us, it's simple. Understanding these underlying forces allows us to see the logic behind global events and gain a much clearer picture of where the global economy is heading next. To understand the map, we first need to define what economic risk actually means in this context. When I talk about risk, I'm not referring to temporary market dips or isolated financial crises. I'm talking about macro resilience, the fundamental capacity of entire countries and regions to withstand long-term pressure. True economic risk accumulates when structural problems pile up faster than a government and society can effectively resolve them. There are a few clear indicators we can use to read this map. For instance, capital thrives where the rule of law is reliable and policymaking is steady, not chaotic. When rules change overnight or are applied selectively, uncertainty spikes, and capital hates surprises. It craves environments where it can plan at least a few years out. Or take another critical indicator tied to external pressure, such as geopolitical conflicts, sanctions, and international friction. When a country gets dragged into a prolonged standoff, even a powerhouse economy begins to bleed. In these conditions, costs skyrocket, access to markets and technology shrinks, and investors pull back. Capital always reacts to signs of long-term instability. Equally important is an economy's ability to adapt to change. The world is moving fast, and regions that can flexibly retool their industries, champion new technologies, and invest heavily in education will thrive. Those that are rigid and slow to adapt build up latent risks that eventually become catastrophic over the long haul. Through this lens, we can divide the modern world into three distinct zones: territories where risks are already high and rising, regions actively restructuring to find a new growth model, and spaces of relative stability where capital flees for safety. Moving forward, I will use this breakdown to systematically analyze today's map of economic risks. When we look at the world through this lens, the high-risk zones stand out first. This doesn't mean an overnight collapse is inevitable, but it does mean these regions are experiencing a compounding backlog of uncertainty, and their resilience is being pushed to the limit. For several consecutive years, European economies have been operating under intense pressure. Sustained energy challenges have driven up industrial costs, dragging down growth and eroding global competitiveness. Simultaneously, swelling government budgets are forcing leaders to walk a tightrope between funding social safety nets and keeping sovereign debt under control. For international capital, this signals a much less predictable environment. The Middle East remains another perpetual source of friction, historically dictating commodity prices and impacting overall market sentiment. Any escalation there ripples across global markets almost instantly. Even when the direct economic fallout seems contained, the psychological uncertainty forces capital to become deeply cautious and seek calmer waters. We can also include a number of developing economies heavily reliant on foreign financing in this risk zone. We see this acutely in parts of Latin America and South Asia, where massive debt burdens leave national budgets highly vulnerable to shifts in global financial conditions. When global credit tightens, pulling in capital becomes incredibly difficult, as we've seen at various times with countries like Argentina, Pakistan, and others with similar debt profiles. In these situations, internal pressure intensifies and the likelihood of economic disruption spikes. The bottom line here is simple. Capital avoids environments plagued by compounding crises. When multiple vulnerabilities overlap, it creates systemic risk, forcing investors into a defensive wait-and-see approach rather than active expansion. That is all for today's analysis, but we are only halfway through our map. Thank you for watching. Take care of yourselves and stay tuned, because to be continued.